Jesus, Albino, why do you keep repeating the same topics over and over? Because I keep exploring them in my head and breaking new ground, at least according to me. Nothing is ever settled. You do a disservice to yourself and the people you share ideas and opinions with by closing an ongoing case while we live in a world where intellectual evidence is in a constant state of trickling down on us. I used to be a lot more set. If I thought I figured something out, that was it. Dismiss any potential alternatives. I'd even dismiss the idea of there being alternatives before I would ever allow myself to hear them. They were a threat I refused to acknowledge. And people don't like feeling threatened in any capacity. It's a base negative emotion. It's fear. Fear of the unknown, which is the most prominent and powerful fear of all. And that's an extremely resistant barrier that can be nigh impossible to breach. Even when you know what's on the other side is positive at its core, if there's the slightest degree of unaccountable variability associated with it, it can be enough to stop you in your tracks. Take a roller coaster, for instance. If you're scared of them like I am, I can ride like the little baby ones and feel no pride whatsoever in doing so. But anything with loops, I'm like, fuck that, I will fall. What if the restraints don't work? What if the ride malfunctions? What if a meteor appears in the sky and I'm stuck in a loop-de-loop while it hurtles towards me? Fear is our volcano insurance. It's us insulating our perspectives by living life as if the endangered species are overpopulating the earth. Every time I think about going on a roller coaster, I'm like, this would be the time a bolt comes loose and the car flies off the tracks. The chances of that are a decimal of a percentage, but it has the stopping power of absolute certainty. It's the same principle with discussion, and in that case, it needs to be overcome. When someone offers you an opposing viewpoint, what's the absolute worst that could happen? Probably that you get offended. I mean, people die over disagreements, but if you consider yourself a reasonable person, which you can't if you refuse to listen to reason from another side, not necessarily agree, but listen. If you consider yourself a reasonable person and you consider the person you're talking to a reasonable person, you can hedge your bets the dialogue won't end in bloodshed, otherwise you were wrong about one of you. But so, say you get offended. Don't let that shut down the conversation. Take a moment. Feel that feeling and make sure you know why you feel that way. Offense is a gut reaction, but you can analyze it for a bit and realize you maybe jumped to the wrong conclusion. But mostly, it's important to stay your own hand after the initial pang of unpleasantness because it's a very reactionary emotion, and once triggered, it wants to demand an immediate emotional response that you should not give under any circumstances, or you will say or do things you later regret. Anytime emotions are controlling you, that's true. We've reached a consensus on that as people when it comes to anger. Everyone who isn't the Incredible Hulk will tell you to control your anger, and being offended is just wounded anger. The Hulk won't tell you to control your anger, but Bruce Banner sure fucking will, I promise you that. And people who are easily or often offended should have to sit with it for a while anyway, because it's too rewarding for them to turn it into instant gratification in the form of an angry tweet or reaction. The turnaround on negative to positive feelings as a result of being offended is ridiculous. It's like flipping a house, but you're flipping your emotions and leaving with a sizable profit. Imagine you come home and your house is a mess, vandalized even, broken glass everywhere, furniture torn up, you were vandalized by a tiger, let's say. Seeing that would be horrible. You'd get this terrible feeling welling up inside you. But if you could fix everything and put it all back the way it was by snapping your fingers, what do? You snap your fingers and feel an instant sense of elation because order has been restored and it was so effortless and quick that you actually feel better now than you did before you saw that your house was ruined. That's almost what the process of being offended is. Only now imagine that instead of coming home and finding your house vandalized, someone's just rearranged your furniture a little to offer a different perspective of how things can look, but you react as if your house has been stampeded by a pack of rhinos anyway. That's the true essence of being offended, at least by jokes or well-meaning discussion. If you're offended by someone calling you a fat cow, they vandalized your house. Feel free to react accordingly. But what's prevalent in society is the inability to distinguish jokes and well-meaning discussion from destruction of property. And the only solution I can offer is for people to slow down and think. Determine. Is this person attacking you, or are they trying to engage you? Are they making a statement, or are they telling a joke? You'd be surprised how often absence of thought disguises itself as an abundance of it. So we're back to feminism again, and I have developed a little mental exercise for you, which I believe can help people zero in on exactly what kind of feminist they are, if any. If you're the type to scoff whenever a guy wants to offer a perspective on feminism, that's one type of feminist right there. Congrats on being the first to affirm your identity. Here's the hypothetical situation. An employer has 10 open job slots available. He sits down with and interviews 20 applicants, 10 men, 10 women. Maybe some book has already explored this, but I came up with it in the shower independently, so I'm rolling with it. The shower is for deep thoughts. We all know this. The employer is only looking to hire the most qualified people for the job. If the employer hires all 10 men and no women, is it possible for this to not be sexist? If you say no, it has to be sexist, you are what I am now calling an outcome feminist, someone who believes that matching gender numbers matters more than individual qualifications. And if those numbers are ever tilted in favor of men, it must be due to discrimination against women. If I tell you the employer hired all 10 men and no women, and you are inclined to ask what race the women are, when I've made no mention of it, you're an intersectional feminist. That's already well defined. Someone who believes that gender discrimination has other factors, such as race and status, and wants to attack those improprieties on all fronts simultaneously. Intersectional feminists still believe the system is rigged against women, but they make more of an effort to accommodate women of color, who sometimes feel like certain feminists are only looking out for white women, which would be a terrific hypocrisy. If I tell you the employer hired all 10 men and no women, and your response is that equality has already been achieved thanks to the sit-down interviews he had with both men and women, all of whom were able to apply for the same position and received the same consideration, I would call you what I would call myself, but only in the context of this video, because unfortunately my terms have no traction in the real world, which is a rational feminist. Someone who can see when women are given a fair shake, even when it works out disproportionately against them, and say, hey, fair play, all of those men happen to be more qualified than all of those women. You'll get them next time. For the record, if the employer hired all 10 women and no men, I'd be like, great, you got a whole softball team and a water girl. But outside this video, if someone asked me if I was a feminist, I'd say no. Because simply believing in equality of opportunity, which 99% of the population believes in, isn't enough to be considered one, and frankly, the whole feminist dichotomy needs to be redefined for the public, so there is clear separation between people who want equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, even though there's already equality of opportunity even now in traditionally gendered organizations like the fucking Boy Scouts, which is real interesting because the Girl Scouts slammed that decision while touting themselves as a safe haven for single-gendered expression. The Girl Scouts hate that the Boy Scouts let girls in now, literally calling it an accelerant to the house fire of sexual assault. Basically, don't let girls into the Boy Scouts or they'll all get raped, which is a neat sentiment from an organization that places ideologies into the minds of 1.8 million young girls. Conversely, I just read an article that says the Democratic National Committee has just passed an amendment that prohibits gender variance among its members from exceeding 1, meaning it's literally mandated that they have an exactly equal number of men and women across the board. That is the most radical example of inclusion I've ever seen, and it happened like yesterday. The funny thing is that will lower the overall opportunities of both men and women, depending on who's already filling the slots. Now the more qualified women are going to see their opportunities dwindle because, oops, sorry, we already have enough women on the board, although according to the gender-neutral rules they passed alongside this, you could just say you identified as a man and then the slot's yours, no questions asked. Things like this are part of why I think Republicans are gonna hold on to the White House in 2020, even if it's not Trump at the helm. Like, if his legal woes actually managed to take him down, which maybe, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Keeping the race metaphor, the left is too busy jogging slowly to make sure nobody on their team feels like they're lagging behind, while the right sprints every man for himself. As a result, you've definitely got equality among Democrats, but closer to the bottom of the leaderboards. Admittedly, the 10-employee test is kind of a fallacy inherently, because if you're trying to fill an office or something and you've got to hire 10 people, they will never all be men. Unless you're in Saudi Arabia or some shit. Even if it's only one woman, there will be a woman, which would be a huge anomaly according to a study that claims men hire women at a 40% rate, while women hire women at a 50% rate. And even if she isn't hired for her credentials, she'll be hired for diversity. And when I say diversity, I don't just mean quota filling. I mean a female perspective is valuable and different from a male's. Even if they have the same ideas, women will present them differently than men do and tend to view situations from different angles. And look, If you don't think there are differences between men and women, you might as well throw all observational humor out the window, because all we've noticed in human history since stand-up comedy was invented is how annoying airport security is and the differences between men and women. Even female self-described feminist comedians talk about them. There are biological and psychological differences between men and women, even if they aren't radical, although biologically they're pretty radical since I don't happen to have a womb in me, and I lean towards testosterone, and my chromosomes are a little different, and I have a big old cock. And balls! I like separating those two things, as if it's not a given that you would have both, unless you're a eunuch, I guess. If there was no difference between men and women, I don't think trans people would be so keen on changing their gender for what would then be no reason. Also, everybody in the world would be pansexual, and evolution would have gradually turned us all into hermaphrodites. Except we actually would have just all started out as hermaphrodites from the beginning of time, because if gender is a social construct, it's pretty weird that it's perfectly matched our DNA for millennia, with the obvious exception of trans people who have a brain thing that makes it not. But as it's known, if you look up stats, only 1% of America is transgender, so redefining biology for everyone at their behest is pretty silly since we don't redefine it for people with body dysmorphia who are twice as numerous and equally unhappy with their bodies. It's dawned on me that I probably don't decry anti-women's sentiment as much, if at all, when I bring up this subject. And maybe some people might think I'm soft on that belief, which I'm not. But that's mostly because I've never seen it. I mean, I'm sure it exists, but like pretty much everything exists. Like there are people out there who think Pikachu is their favorite Yu-Gi-Oh card because they're fucking stupid. There's no end to the amount of dumb, nonsensical beliefs people hold that are based in flat-out garbage. So do I denounce people who legitimately think women don't deserve the same opportunities as men? Obviously I do. What kind of man thinks that? What kind of woman thinks that? A slave? A slave holder? Men who hate women always do so because of a refusal to acknowledge their own faults or a refusal to acknowledge that their faults are the problem. It spurns from rejection. Nobody hates women while they're getting a blowjob they didn't have to pay for. Or else you get people who don't hate women but think of them as lesser beings, reproduction tools with an unfortunate consciousness that gets in the way of their evolutionary purpose. That's pretty shit too. Naturally, you should avoid people like that, but it's not always obvious what their viewpoint is, and they may even hide it to keep the relationship afloat, although to them it's not a relationship as much as it is ownership. Some important things to note here, though. Not being a feminist is not the same as being an anti-feminist. Self-described anti-feminists are usually dog-shit individuals because they want to push back just as radically in the opposite direction as the radical feminists are pushing for everything they're doing. They are equally as annoying, if not more so, because of their inherent trolling nature, and they should never have their penises touched ever. Whereas people who just aren't feminists are merely apathetic or they simply don't agree with the tactics used to further the feminist agenda. These would be rational feminists in the context of my video, but in the real world that term doesn't exist, so they are just not aligned with the feminist doctrines. Date a man who isn't a feminist. Men who describe themselves as feminists are fucking awful, and often use that status to feel entitled to women just as toxically as other guys do. Like, hey, I went to the women's march, where's my hand job? These are the guys who incessantly white knight in the comments of girls' Instagrams when other guys either sexualize her or say something rude, so they can score fuck me points and feel justified in sending a DM like, ugh, men are pigs, but not me, here's my number. They're persistent little bitches, and they're as bad as anti-feminists while just as aggressive. I'm probably not done with this topic, but I am for now. That's gonna do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.